going to have to collapse, and we can't keep trying to prop it back up in the name of short-term stimulus. We have to let it fail. A lot of people have to lose their jobs. That's just how it's going to have to be, because the jobs are inefficient. We can't artificially support them. We don't want jobs because we want work. We want the stuff that the jobs produce. We want the productivity. And there are a lot of companies that are going to have to fail. I mean, there's a lot of companies that aren't profitable. They can't stay in business. There is nothing wrong with a company going bankrupt. What's wrong is keeping an insolvent company in business to squander even more resources. Right? If a company is losing money, right, that means it's taking resources that are scarce, it's taking labor, it's taking capital, and it's combining them in a way where it's destroying value. We want to stop that as soon as possible. We don't want it to drag on. We don't want to lose even more money. But that's what the government wants to do. The government wants to keep these businesses in place. You know, I was on CNN last night talking about the bailouts for the automobile companies. When I said, look, the government needs to let them fail, you know, Ali Belchi is on there saying, but Peter, what about all the people who are going to lose their jobs? We can't let these people lose their jobs. You know? Well, exactly. But what they don't understand is, what about all the jobs that we destroy to keep these companies in business? Nobody sees those jobs. And yeah, they're going to lose. Look how many jobs the auto sector has lost. I mean, it's lost 90% of its jobs over the last 30 or 40 years. You know, the government is so proud of the fact that they bailed out Chrysler in 1979. They said, oh, this is an example of a government bailout that worked. How did it work? They're bankrupt again 30 years later. You know, if we had let Chrysler fail 30 years ago, General Motors wouldn't be failing right now. And I bet Chrysler, the re-emerged Chrysler, would be a solvent company. And if we had let Chrysler fail, then General Motors wouldn't have caved into every single union demand, because they would have said, look, we're not going to be able to stay in business. But the minute the government bailed out Chrysler, the message that we sent to General Motors was, we got you covered, don't worry. Because obviously if we wouldn't let Chrysler fail, we're not going to let GM fail. No, now everybody is too big to fail, which is ridiculous. Nobody is too big to fail. You know, in fact, all these guys that want to say that you're too big to fail, when you create that impression that you're too big to fail, you totally distort the free market. Because now, if a company is irresponsible and making bad, you know, has a risky balance sheet and is doing bad things, they can still borrow money. Whereas smaller companies that might be more economically viable are starved for credit because they're not too big to fail. We need companies to fail because that's what keeps creditors on their risk, you know, looking out for risk. If the government says don't worry about it, they're too big to fail, then they're going to get loans. I mean, that's the moral hazard. I mean, how did we get this housing bubble? Apart from the Federal Reserve making money so cheap that teaser rates, you know, got so many people into the housing market. But when the government came up with Fannie and Freddie, what was the idea? The idea was, well, we're going to guarantee mortgages. We're going to tell lenders, you don't have to worry if the borrower can pay you back the money, because the government's going to guarantee everybody's mortgage. Well, the minute the government's doing that, what's the moral hazard? Now people don't care. Once they get that government guarantee, it doesn't matter. And so you get a lot more fraud in the system. You have people lying about their incomes and misdocumenting things because they know, look, I just got to get the Fannie or Freddie to stamp this thing and I can get cheap money. Because the lender doesn't care as long as the government approves it. And what people don't seem to understand is that credit is scarce. You know, when you have Barack Obama says, we need to restore credit, we need more credit. Well, how are we going to have more credit if we don't have any savings? We can't borrow money unless somebody saves it. Someone has to be willing to loan it to us. The credit is gone because we're broke. The savings are gone. We borrowed a lot of money and now we can't pay it back. So we don't have it anymore. We have to rebuild our credit by rebuilding our savings. But if people borrow money to buy stuff, if people borrow money to buy things and the government borrows money to spend it on programs, where are our businesses going to get money? How are we going to rebuild a viable economy if business is crowded out by government and by consumers borrowing with government guarantees? Because nobody can compete with the government when the government, you know, has a guaranteed debt. So what we need, this credit crunch, right? When the president is saying we need Americans to buy more cars, no, we don't. We need that like a hole in the head. We don't, you know, they have a new bill they're trying to pass to get us to trade in our cars and buy new ones. We ought to try to squeeze every last mile out of our cars. Where it's like, you know, if you're a family and you lose your job and you go and tell your wife, you know, we lost our job, I lost my job, what should we do? And her advice is, well, why don't we put it in a swimming pool? You know, spending money is not the way out of a crisis, especially a crisis that's the result of reckless borrowing and spending. And you know, Barack Obama talks a good game. You know, I listen to some of his speeches, and he sounds like he's reading from my book half the time. Problem is, the other half of the time, you know, he talks about that we got to stop spending, right? That we gotta save our money, that we got to produce, that we got to export. All this is true, but none of this is going to happen based on the policies that he's pursuing, because it's all short term. And he'll say stuff like, well, yes, we need to save in the long run, but we can't save now. We can't. We got to spend, but eventually we got to save. And again, that's all nonsense. It's like he's saying, I know we're in a big hole. We just need to dig it a little deeper, and then we can get out. Yeah. But we don't want to dig the hole deeper. We want to bite the bullet. You know, had we done that in 2001 and 2002, had George Bush leveled with the American public and said, hey, we had a phony economy under Clinton. We lived under a Federal Reserve-induced asset bubble, and now we're going to have a few years of a very painful recession. He said, who cares about the long run? I want to get reelected. What can we do to goose this economy for the next couple of years? And that's exactly what Barack Obama is doing. For all his talk about change and about how it's going to be different, it's all the same. Nothing has changed at all. All that's changed is he's even more irresponsible. And it's almost laughable that he criticizes Bush for his deficits. He's criticizing him as he's quadrupling them. And then he has the nerve to say, yeah, but I'm going to cut the deficit in half in 4 years. Yeah, but it'll still be twice what it was before you came in. And that's assuming that he does that, which I think it'll be worse. I mean, we could add $10 trillion of debt. And of course, the real crisis is yet to come. And the real crisis will probably hit sometime during the Barack Obama administration. And the crisis maybe will bring an end to the Fed all on its own. Because when the Federal Reserve notes, when their market value matches their intrinsic value, what difference is it going to make? I mean, they can print the money, all the money they want. What good is it if nobody will accept it in exchange for anything? And you know, history is littered with paper currencies that have become worthless. It's happened twice in the United States. The Continental was a paper currency that circulated before the Civil War, practically worthless. Anybody have any Confederate money? It's not worth anything. You know, look what's happening in Zimbabwe right now. I mean, our money is inherently no different. It's the same thing at this point. There's nothing behind it. What's the difference between a $100 bill and a $1 bill? Just a couple of zeros on the piece of paper. There's no real difference there. What gives it value? Just confidence. That's all. The fact people have confidence. Well, people had confidence in the Zimbabwe dollar at one time, and they lost it. People had confidence in the Reichsmark in Germany, and they lost it. There are all sorts of paper currencies that had a lot of value, and people lost confidence. And people are going to lose confidence in our money when they realize we're just running it off the printing presses trying to maintain a bubble. And the problem is, the more the government intervenes in this economy, the more the government works to fight off this recession, which is actually the cure, right? The more likely it is that we die from the disease. And the disease is going to be hyperinflation. The money will have no value. And the other question is, what is the government going to do between now and then? Because what I'm afraid for is that when some of the factors that have been keeping a lid on prices in this country, when they subside, we've gotten a pass in the last 6 months, 9 months. We haven't really been hit with the full impact of the inflation that we created. Remember, all inflation comes from the Fed. Inflation is the money supply growing. It's not prices rising. Prices rise as a consequence of inflation, but they don't necessarily rise right away. There's a lag. And what's happened is the Fed's created a lot of inflation, but a lot of people don't see it.